Wanda Pruitt added her son to her bank account for 6 weeks of recovery after a routine hip surgery. 2 years later, her sister sat across the kitchen table from her, pointing at a printed bank statement showing her something Wanda had never once let herself add up. This is her story. Wanda is 70, widowed 4 years, a retired postal worker who spent 31 years delivering mail across the same rural Kentucky route before retiring. She lives alone in the house she and her late husband shared and has one adult son, Travis, 44, a hardworking industrial mechanic. 2 years ago, facing a scheduled hip replacement and the several weeks of limited mobility that would follow, Wanda made a decision that seemed, at the time, entirely reasonable and even responsible. She added Travis as a joint owner on her primary checking account, giving him the ability to pay her bills and handle any financial emergency while she recovered. Wanda had spent 3 decades building a quiet, disciplined financial life, saving carefully from a modest postal salary, paying off her mortgage well ahead of schedule, and maintaining the same conservative, careful habits with money that had served her and her late husband well through every stretch of their marriage. She had never been the type to leave financial matters loosely managed, which made the eventual outcome of this particular arrangement all the more disorienting once she finally understood its full scope. It was meant to last 6 weeks. Nobody, including Wanda, ever formally ended it. The surgery itself went smoothly, and Wanda's recovery, while slow and occasionally frustrating, proceeded largely as expected. Travis handled her bills responsibly during those 6 weeks, paying everything on time, checking in regularly, exactly the attentive, capable son Wanda had always known him to be. When Wanda's mobility returned and she resumed managing her own finances day to day, the joint account arrangement simply remained in place, unremarked upon, a leftover convenience neither of them thought to revisit once the original need had passed. There was no specific moment when either of them consciously decided to keep the account joint indefinitely. It simply never came up again, the way so many temporary arrangements quietly become permanent, not through any deliberate choice, but through the simple absence of anyone ever raising the question of whether it was still necessary. Travis, meanwhile, was quietly navigating a considerably more difficult stretch of his own life than he had shared with his mother, or, as it would later become clear, fully shared with his own wife, Karen, 41. His marriage had grown financially strained over the previous several years, weighed down by a series of decisions, an ambitious home renovation that ran well over budget, a used truck purchase that stretched their monthly finances further than either of them had planned for, mounting credit card balances Travis found increasingly difficult to discuss openly, even with Karen. Travis had always taken a certain quiet pride in being the responsible one in his own household, the steady provider who didn't burden his wife with financial worry. That pride, over time, had curdled into something closer to avoidance, a habit of managing each new financial pressure privately, absorbing it however he could, rather than admitting out loud that the pressures had begun exceeding what his own income could comfortably manage. His mother's joint account, still sitting open and available 2 years after her surgery, became, without any single conscious decision on his part, the easiest available pressure valve whenever a new financial gap opened up faster than he could close it through his own resources alone. The first small withdrawal from Wanda's account that Travis didn't specifically discuss with her in advance happened about 4 months after her surgery, a modest amount covering an unexpected car repair. When Wanda noticed the withdrawal on her monthly statement and asked about it, Travis explained readily, almost apologetically. "Sorry, Mom. I meant to mention it. The truck needed brakes urgently, and I was a little short that week. I'll put it back as soon as I get paid Friday." Wanda, still genuinely grateful for how attentively Travis had managed her finances during her recovery, accepted the explanation easily. Family helped family. It seemed like such a small thing. The pattern that followed over the next 2 years repeated itself with a consistency Wanda never fully registered while it was happening, precisely because each individual instance arrived with its own reasonable, specific explanation, and because Travis genuinely did make partial, sporadic efforts to replace what he'd taken, just often enough to maintain Wanda's basic trust in the arrangement. A withdrawal here for an unexpected medical bill for one of Travis and Karen's children, a withdrawal there to cover a mortgage payment during a particularly tight month, small amounts individually, each one accompanied by a plausible story and a genuine, if often unfulfilled intention to pay it back promptly. There was the $200 covering a plumbing emergency, repaid in full within the month. There was the $400 covering a late credit card payment, repaid only partially, the remainder quietly absorbed into the account's balance without further comment from either of them. There was the $600 covering a rushed veterinary bill for the family dog, never repaid at all, a fact Wanda genuinely didn't register at the time, distracted by her own busy week and trusting, as she generally did, that Travis would handle it eventually the way he usually seemed to. Wanda noticed over those same 2 years that her own financial cushion seemed to be shrinking somewhat faster than she would have expected, but she attributed the tightness to rising grocery prices, increased property taxes, and her own occasional larger purchases, never quite connecting the gradual squeeze to the accumulating pattern of Travis's withdrawals from an account she had, in practice, stopped reviewing as closely as she once might have. Karen, meanwhile, had grown increasingly uneasy about the state of her marriage's finances, sensing that something didn't fully add up between what Travis brought home and what their household seemed to actually be spending, without being able to pinpoint the exact source of the discrepancy. Travis, ashamed of the mounting financial pressure and unwilling to fully confront it, even with his own wife, kept the details vague, offering reassurances rather than actual transparency whenever Karen raised concerns. Karen had started keeping a private mental tally of her own, small inconsistencies that never quite added up cleanly, a credit card statement that seemed higher than she expected, a savings goal Travis kept postponing without a clear explanation, a general unease that had settled into their marriage over the past year or so, without any single confrontation clarifying exactly why. She had asked Travis directly more than once whether everything was truly fine financially, and had received each time the same brief deflecting reassurance that left her feeling less than fully convinced, but without any concrete evidence to push further. The situation reached a new, more consequential stage roughly 18 months into the arrangement, when Travis, attempting to refinance his and Karen's mortgage to secure a lower interest rate, found himself discussing his overall financial picture with a loan officer who asked broadly about available assets and financial resources. Travis, perhaps not entirely consciously, mentioned the joint bank account he shared with his mother as part of his available financial resources, a detail that, while not technically dishonest, considerably overstated his own actual financial independence and stability, leaning on his mother's savings, in effect, to help present a stronger financial picture than his own circumstances alone would have supported. Wanda had no idea at the time that her retirement savings had been mentioned, even informally, as part of her son's mortgage refinancing conversation, or that the very existence of the joint account was quietly functioning as a kind of informal financial cushion underneath decisions that had nothing directly to do with her own life at all. The refinancing itself ultimately fell through for unrelated reasons, but the loan officer's paperwork, reviewed briefly by Karen during the application process, contained a reference to the joint account that Karen didn't fully understand at the time, filing the detail away in the back of her mind without immediately connecting it to her broader, unresolved unease about their finances. It was Wanda's younger sister, Beverly, 66, a retired accountant, who finally uncovered the full pattern, almost by accident, while helping Wanda organize paperwork for her annual tax filing. Sitting together at Wanda's kitchen table one afternoon, sorting through a stack of printed bank statements, Beverly's trained eye caught something that took her a moment to fully process. "Wanda, do you know what all these small withdrawals are? There's a lot of them, and they're pretty regular," Beverly said, spreading several months of statements across the table, tracing a pattern with her finger that grew clearer the further back she looked. "Oh, that's just Travis, every once in a while. If he's a little short," Wanda said, somewhat defensively, not yet fully registering the scale Beverly was pointing toward. "He always pays it back." Beverly, saying nothing further in the moment, pulled out a notepad and began, methodically, working backward through 2 full years of statements, listing every withdrawal Wanda attributed to Travis, alongside every repayment Wanda could recall or find documented. The process took the better part of an hour, Beverly's decades of professional habit taking over as she organized the numbers into careful columns, cross-referencing dates and amounts with the patient thoroughness of someone who had spent an entire career finding exactly this kind of pattern buried inside far more complicated sets of books. Wanda sat beside her mostly in silence throughout the process, watching the 2 columns grow, feeling a slow, uncomfortable recognition build with every new entry Beverly added. By the time Beverly finished, both women sat staring at a final number that neither of them had expected. Over 2 years, Travis had withdrawn just over $12,000 from the joint account in small, individually modest increments. Documented repayments, tracked carefully against the withdrawals, amounted to barely a quarter of that total. "Wanda," Beverly said gently, sliding the notepad across the table, "I don't think this is a one-time favor between mother and son anymore. This looks like a pattern that's been quietly draining your savings for 2 years. Wanda stared at the number for a long moment, feeling something complicated move through her. Not quite anger, not exactly betrayal, something closer to a slow, disorienting recalculation of the last 2 years of her own financial life. He always had a reason, Wanda said quietly, almost to herself. Every single time there was a reason. I believe that, Beverly said. I don't think Travis set out to take advantage of you deliberately. I think this is what happens when access stays open indefinitely, past whatever it was originally meant for. The reasons stop mattering after a while. The pattern is what matters. Beverly reached over and tapped the notepad gently, drawing Wanda's attention back to the final total. In my 30 years doing this professionally, Wanda, I saw this exact shape more times than I can count, in far more formal settings than a mother and son sharing a checking account. A temporary access arrangement extended informally past its original purpose almost always grows, not because anyone plans it that way, because once the boundary disappears, there's nothing left marking where help is supposed to stop. The following week, Wanda and Beverly visited the local bank branch together, meeting with Mr. Higgins, the branch manager who had known Wanda for decades, since her own working years delivering mail throughout the county. Mr. Higgins listened carefully as Wanda explained the situation, pulling up the account's full history on his computer to review the pattern Beverly had already documented by hand. Mrs. Pruitt, I want to walk you through exactly how to fix this properly, he said. Removing Travis as a joint owner is straightforward enough, but I also want to make sure you have a better tool in place going forward, in case you ever genuinely need help managing things again. He pulled up Wanda's account history on his screen, scrolling slowly through 2 years of transactions, occasionally pausing to point out a pattern Beverly had already flagged by hand, a Thursday afternoon withdrawal that recurred with unusual regularity, a series of round number amounts that suggested emergency need rather than planned, budgeted expenses. Seeing the pattern confirmed independently by someone with full access to the bank's own records gave Wanda a strange, sinking kind of clarity, the last small hope that Beverly's tally might somehow have been an exaggeration, finally settling into full, undeniable confirmation. He explained patiently the same distinction that had proven so important in situations like Wanda's before, that a limited financial power of attorney would allow a trusted family member to assist with her finances during a genuine emergency without granting the kind of open-ended, permanent ownership that had allowed 2 years of gradual, undocumented withdrawals to accumulate largely unnoticed. A joint account means exactly what it says. Joint, Mr. Higgins explained. Both owners have full, equal access, with no built-in mechanism requiring the other person's approval or awareness before money moves. A power of attorney can be far more specific, limited to exactly the circumstances you actually want to authorize. I wish someone had explained that difference to me 2 years ago, Wanda said quietly. You're far from the first person to sit in that chair and say exactly that, Mrs. Pruitt, Mr. Higgins said, not unkindly. It's an easy mistake to make, especially under time pressure before a surgery, when the goal is simply making sure someone can help quickly if needed. The trouble is almost never the original intention. It's forgetting to revisit the arrangement once the original need has passed. Wanda left the bank that afternoon having formally removed Travis from the account, replacing the arrangement with a properly documented limited power of attorney that Beverly herself would hold instead, specific to genuine emergencies rather than the open-ended, informal safety net the original joint account had quietly become. The conversation with Travis, when it finally happened a few days later, was among the most difficult Wanda could remember having with her son in his entire adult life. She invited him to sit down at the same kitchen table where she and Beverly had first uncovered the full pattern, the printed statement still sitting in a folder in front of her. "Travis, I need you to look at something with me," Wanda said, sliding the folder across the table. "I need you to see this the way I finally saw it, all the numbers together, not just one favor at a time." Travis's face, as he worked through the documented total, moved through several stages: confusion, then dawning recognition, then something that looked to Wanda like genuine shame. "Mom, I never meant for it to add up to this much," he said quietly. "Every single time I really did mean to pay it back quickly. Things kept coming up." "I believe that you meant it, every time," Wanda said. "But I need you to understand what actually happened. Regardless of what you meant, you used my savings quietly for 2 years without ever sitting me down and telling me the full truth about what was actually going on in your own finances." Travis was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke again, considerably more came out than Wanda had expected. "Things have been really bad with money, Mom. Worse than I've told you. Worse than I've told Karen, too, honestly. The renovation cost way more than we planned, and I've just been kind of drowning ever since, moving money around to keep things afloat without really dealing with the actual problem." He described haltingly the specific shape of the pressure he'd been carrying largely alone for the better part of 3 years. The renovation invoices that kept arriving higher than the original estimates, the truck payment he'd underestimated when he signed the loan, the growing sense that admitting the full scope of the problem to Karen or to his mother would mean admitting he'd failed at the one thing he'd always prided himself on being good at. Wanda listened without interrupting, recognizing underneath her son's obvious distress the same instinct toward quiet self-reliance that she herself had modeled for him throughout his entire childhood, after his father's own occasional financial missteps years earlier. The admission, painful as it was, opened a door that had apparently needed opening for considerably longer than either of them had realized. Travis admitted that he'd also referenced the joint account, at least indirectly, during his mortgage refinancing conversation, a detail that visibly troubled him once he said it out loud and heard how it actually sounded. "Mom, I think I've been treating your account like a cushion under my whole financial life without ever really admitting that to myself," he said. "That's not okay. I know that's not okay." In the weeks that followed, the conversation Wanda and Travis had at that kitchen table set off a cascade of considerably more honest conversations throughout the rest of the family. Travis finally sat down with Karen and laid out their full financial situation, transparently, for the first time in years, including the withdrawals from his mother's account that Karen had never fully understood the scope of. Karen, for her part, was troubled but not entirely surprised, having sensed for a long time that something wasn't adding up, without knowing the specific shape of what she'd been sensing. The full transparency, however difficult to hear, gave the couple something they hadn't had in years, an accurate shared picture of their actual financial circumstances, rather than a series of individually managed crises kept partially hidden even from each other. "I kept thinking something was wrong, and you kept telling me everything was fine," Karen told Travis during the difficult conversation that followed his admission. "I would have rather known the truth 2 years ago than find out this way, from your mother's bank statements instead of from you." The couple began, together, working with a financial counselor to build an actual plan for their household finances, something Travis admitted he should have sought out years earlier instead of quietly managing each new crisis alone. Karen, relieved simply to finally have accurate information to work with, found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, feeling closer to Travis in the aftermath of the difficult conversation than she had in the anxious, uncertain months leading up to it. Wanda and Travis together established a formal documented repayment plan for the outstanding balance, a modest monthly amount Travis could genuinely sustain without creating further financial strain, tracked carefully this time with clear expectations on both sides. "I'm not doing this to punish you," Wanda told him as they finalized the plan together. "I'm doing this because vague, undocumented favors are what got us here in the first place. I need this to be real and trackable for both our sakes." Travis agreed without argument, and the two of them set a specific monthly transfer date, calendared clearly, with both of them checking in briefly each month simply to confirm the payment had gone through as planned. A small ordinary ritual that, unlike the original open-ended account access, gave both of them exactly the kind of visibility and accountability the previous 2 years had so badly lacked. The account itself remained, from that point forward, exclusively in Wanda's name, with Beverly's limited power of attorney available strictly for genuine future emergencies, reviewed and reauthorized periodically, rather than left indefinitely in place the way the original joint account arrangement had been. Wanda's story is worth telling because it involves no dramatic theft, no calculated deception, nothing that either party would easily identify in the moment as a single clear wrongdoing. It involves something far more common and in some ways more dangerous, precisely because it's so gradual. A temporary arrangement that outlived its original purpose, quietly absorbed into a pattern neither person fully examined until someone finally added up 2 years of small numbers into one large one. It is worth noting, too, that Wanda's story could easily have gone differently and considerably worse without Beverly's particular professional background and the simple accident of timing that brought the two sisters together over a stack of tax documents. Many families never get that moment of accidental clarity, the pattern simply continuing indefinitely, growing larger and more entrenched with each passing year, never quite reaching the threshold of an obvious crisis that would force anyone to finally add up the full picture. If you have ever considered giving a family member temporary access to your bank account, here is what Wanda's experience can teach us. Temporary needs an actual end date, documented clearly, not simply a vague intention to revisit the arrangement eventually. Set a specific date to formally end the access and actually follow through when that date arrives. Review your bank statements regularly and carefully, especially, not despite, having given someone else access to the account. Trust and vigilance are not contradictory. The second protects the first. Understand that joint account ownership can be referenced, even informally, as part of someone else's financial picture in situations that have nothing directly to do with you, from loan applications to other financial negotiations entirely outside your knowledge. Small, recurring withdrawals with reasonable individual explanations still deserve to be added up and evaluated together, not simply accepted one at a time without ever stepping back to see the fuller pattern. A limited financial power of attorney nearly always accomplishes the same practical goal of emergency assistance as joint ownership, without carrying the same open-ended, permanent risk. And ending a temporary arrangement on schedule is an act of care, not distrust, for both people involved. It protects your own security, and it protects the other person from a slow, unintended slide into a pattern they may not have consciously chosen either. Beverly, reflecting on the whole episode months later, offered Wanda one final observation that stuck with both of them. None of this happened because Travis is a bad person or because you were careless, Wanda. It happened because a 6-week arrangement never got a proper ending. That's the whole story, really. Not villains. Just an open door nobody remembered to close. Wanda's account today holds exactly what it should, growing steadily again for the first time in 2 years, protected by a boundary that exists not because she stopped trusting her son, but because she finally understood the difference between trusting someone and leaving a door standing permanently open. She and Travis still talk every week, the conversations noticeably different in tone now than they were before that difficult afternoon at the kitchen table. Travis calls these days, mostly just to talk about work, about the kids, about ordinary things that have nothing to do with money at all. Wanda has come to treasure those calls in a way she hadn't fully appreciated before, understanding now how much of their previous relationship had been quietly, invisibly shaped by an arrangement neither of them had ever properly examined. Have you ever given a family member access to your bank account temporarily? Did you remember to end it? Tell us in the comments below and let us know what city or country you're watching from tonight. Someone else sitting on an arrangement they meant to close months or years ago might need this reminder today. If Wanda's story meant something to you, subscribe to Better with Time for more stories from the dignity years, because temporary help should never quietly become a permanent, unexamined habit.